Welcome back, aliens. My name is Davin Reddy, and in this video, we'll talk about Hibernate. Now, if you go to the website of Hibernate, it says Hibernate everything data. That's right. So whenever you want to work with data, we use Hibernate. But hold on, we have not talked about the language. We have not talked about the framework we are going to use this. See, when you talk about the enterprise application, if you want to build a world-class enterprise application, and most of the companies are using Java there. And specifically, if we talk about a framework, the framework is called a Spring framework. And inside Spring, we have multiple modules to work with. And of course, if you want to build application now, the first thing which should come to your mind is Spring, of course, right? And in Spring, it provides you different projects. In fact, there is one of the project for data as well, which is called Spring Data JPA. Okay, and it simplifies the way you store data in database. But even the Spring Data JPA behind the scene works with Hibernate. So if you know Hibernate well, it will help you to understand Spring Data JPA in a good way. Now coming back to Hibernate here, it says everything data. Now whenever you want to work with data, of course you store this data in the database. And specifically if we talk about the relational databases, let's say MySQL, Postgres, Oracle, or whichever your favorite DBMS is, and let me know in the comments which is your favorite DBMS. At this point, mine is Postgres. I was very happy with MySQL, but looking at Postgres, it looks good. So yeah, so we are going to use Postgres here. Otherwise, you can also use H2 if you want to keep it in memory. But yeah, whenever you want to work with DBMS and if you have a Java application, so the way you work with your Java and database, we use something called JDBC, which is Java Database Connectivity. And database in this side I'm talking about is RDBMS. Okay. Now the problem with JDBC is, of course, it's a great thing. But the problem with JDBC is whenever you want to store data, see by default in the Java world, we store data in the object. So let's say if you have an object of student, which has different properties, let's say a roll number or a name or an age, basically you store that in the object format. So you will create the object of a student, then you will assign all the values. Now you have these values in the object. But if you want to store that in database, what we normally do is we first of all write a query in JDBC. Let's say we are using prepared statement here. And then you write a query in which you put question marks so that you will replace these question marks later, right? In the next line, you will say, okay, the first question mark means the roll number. The second question mark means the name. The third question mark means the age or marks. So what we are doing here is manually, we are fetching data from the object and putting that in the statement, and then we are going to execute it. It works, but the problem is when you are building huge applications, you have multiple entities to work with, multiple objects to work with, multiple operations involved. And doing those things manually, yes, you can do it. I know we are superhumans or we are aliens, we can do that. But using a tool here, which will simply say, hey, I'm a tool here, you give me the object, it is my job to store that in database. You don't even have to write an SQL query. You don't have to get the values from the object. I will do it for you. You don't have to write SQL queries. I will do it for you. And you simply say save. If you want to get the data, say get. If you want to update data, say update. I will do it, everything for you. I mean, sounds like a genie here, but that's ORM for you. I know you are thinking that's Hibernate for you, but no, that's ORM for you. This is the concept of ORM tools, which stands for Object Relational Mapping. And Hibernate is a ORM tool. But hold on, they say Hibernate everything data. They're also mentioning more than an ORM. So that means Hibernate provides you different features like search, validator, reactive. But in this video, we are going to focus only on the Hibernate ORM. Now, Hibernate got different versions. Currently, it is Hibernate 6, which is running, depending upon when you're watching this. We also got the beta version of 7, but we are not going to use the beta version of 7 because it's unstable. And they don't have a lot of updates in 7. Yes, there's one of the update of data repositories. But anyway, in future, you're going to work with Spring, you're going to work with JPA, and by default, you're going to use that. So it makes sense to understand the ORM here. And then you can implement this when you talk about the JPA. Okay, so how do we use it? Now, first of all, Hibernate is a tool. And if you want to embed this in your project, you need a Maven project. Of course, you can also use some other build tool if you want, like we got Gradle, and then there are other options, but we are going to use Maven. So you need a Maven project. Instead of talking much about this, let's get to the code. So what we're going to do is we'll build a simple project. Nothing very fancy, just to understand the concepts. And we are going to do that in the IntelliJ IDEA. You can use any IDE you want, Eclipse, NetBeans, if you're still using it, VS Code. You just have to create a Maven project. So whenever you create a Maven project, you can open that in any IDE and you can basically run it. So I'm using IntelliJ IDEA, and you don't need the ultimate version for this. This is the community version which we're using here. And in this, I'm going to create a new project. So I will click here and creating a new project. I will name this as Hibernate Demo. And the build system is the Maven. Okay, so you can use Gradle, that's your choice. And the version of Oracle in my machine is 23, so I will just stick to it. It's good to use the LTS version, right? So 21 is the LTS version, you can use that. Nothing advanced, click on create. This will give you the project. Before I do anything, the first thing I always do is run the project to check if things are working out. So in the Maven, first of all, let me see things are looking good. There's no red marks here. Normally you do get some red marks if you have some issue with the IDE or the internet connection, but the plugins are available, repositories are available. Okay, looks good here. Anyway, we have not added any dependencies here, so nothing to worry about. But let me go to the Java file. By default, it will give you the debugger here assigned, and it is writing some code. Just to check if things are working out or not, I will just run this, and yeah, it works. You can see some weird output here. That's 1 to 5 using a loop, makes sense. But I don't need these things, and no extra stuff. I think it will go automatically. So to remove some extra brackets. Okay, looks good now. Let me just run this again. Cool, no output, so empty. So that's the empty project. Now, how do you use the ORM here or the Hibernate? Now, basically, what we want to achieve. So when I mentioned about you got an object where you have data and you want to store it, of course, you need that object. And to create the object, you need a class, right? But we'll do that in some time. But imagine, okay, this is more about imagination. You got a class, you got the object, and now you want to save it. So let's say I'm talking to Hibernate. I'm saying, hey, Hibernate, this is my object, save it. The Hibernate will say, okay, done. Okay, that's what I'm expecting here. But in this project, nowhere we have Hibernate apart from the project name. But generally, if we talk about this project, there's nowhere we are talking about Hibernate, okay? How do you add the Hibernate dependencies? Because if you look at the external dependencies here, nowhere we got Hibernate. Okay, so how do we add dependencies? It's very simple. In the Maven file, if you're using Gradle, you can just do that in Gradle fashion. We have to add the dependencies tag, and in this, you have to add dependencies. Now, which dependency? See, first of all, yes, we are going to use Hibernate, but also we are using the Postgres database. And in your machine, you need some DBMS to work with or RDBMS to work with. So you can use Postgres, MySQL, Oracle, that's your choice. I'm using Postgres, and in this machine, I already have Postgres. I already have pgadmin. And anyway, even if you code with MySQL, only 1 or 2 lines will change. Otherwise, things will remain same. The code, the Java code will not change. The property files will change, okay? Okay, cool. So here, if you can see, I have a database ready, which is Telusko. In this database, if you look at the tables, it's empty. So I don't have any tables here. I will just refresh once to see there's no tables. And I want to use this database, okay? So I will go back to my IDE here, and I want to add the dependency for the Postgres. I want to add dependency for Hibernate as well. Now, from where you will get this? Of course, you can type it by yourself if you remember it, or I will go to this famous website for the repositories, which is Maven repository. And here, the first thing I want to search is Postgres. And that's the Postgres driver. Click on this and make sure that you don't click on this because this is relocated to here. So use this. And the latest version is 42.7.5, but I prefer to use the second last version, which is more stable. And if you go to the old one, there are some vulnerabilities. And maybe when you're watching this video after some time, maybe the version which I'm using, it might have some vulnerabilities, but that's how the repositories are. So click on this, and whichever stable version at that point, you can use it. Just copy this, go back here and paste. I will remove this extra add from here. And let's talk about the Hibernate. So this is one dependency we have added. Next is Hibernate. Go back there, search for Hibernate, and the old one is here. This is relocated to this location now. And if you have seen my old videos of Hibernate, I was using this one. But now let's go to this one, which is the new one. And if you see, the version starts from 6 here. So from 6 they have updated it, and 6 came in 2018, the first one, alpha 1. It took them some time to release the final version, 4 years. Okay, because there was a big change in 6. Okay, 7 is not a major one, but you can use it. Now the problem with 7 is it's beta. Of course you can use it, and let me try to use it, and let's see if you face some issues. I will go back to 6. Let's use beta and keep it here. We are not going to use any features of 7. There are some minor changes, and 6 works. So update, and you can see if I go down here, so we got Hibernate, there should be somewhere Postgres, and we got Postgres here. I'm looking for the code, because when you get the 6 version, you get the code. Let me just try with 6. Let's see what happens with 6. I'll go with 6.6.4 and replace this, and there's an add as well here. Save, reload. Okay. Yeah, so you can see with 6 we are getting the code, but I'm not sure if 7 they have made some changes in the library models itself. They're making it more modular. Is that the case? Let me go with 7 again. Let's say, as I mentioned, if 7 doesn't work, we'll go back to 6.6.4. And now there is no error. And you can see, okay, now it is saying code. Maybe there is some issue with the ID, or I was not able to see that. Let me know in the comments if you saw that. Okay, so that's the thing. So we have added these dependencies. That's the first step we have to do. The next step is, let's create those classes. And by default, the package name is org.example. We should change it. So I will say com.telusko, time for promotion. Okay, that's the package. org package we don't need anymore. So I will simply delete it. And in this, let's create those classes. Now to create those classes, let's right click on the package, and here the first class I want to create is the student itself. In fact, why 2 classes? We only need 1 more class. So let's say student, or you can say anything. Let's stick to alien because that's what I love. Alien simply means programmers. That's for me. Okay, now in this class, I need certain details of the alien. So basically I need, and it looks like my AI is enabled. So it's a private int AID, then private string a name, and private string tech. Of course, right? Every developer has some technology which is their favorite. So we got these 3 details here. And for these 3 things, of course, we can use Lombok here, but let me just keep it simple. Instead of adding extra libraries, I will say generate data setters for all different fields. And we need a toString. So I will say right click, generate toString, and that's done. So once we got this alien object, I want to create object of it. I mean, we got the alien class. Let me go back to Maven. And this is where I can create the object. So it's alien, let's say A1 equal to new alien. That's the first object. And this alien needs some data. So I will say AID 101 and A1 dot set name, which is one, or which is not number. That's a name. Let's say Naveen. And A1 dot set tech, which is, let's say my favorite is Java. And once you mention those things, you want to store it somewhere. Now, if you want to store it, how will you do it? So as I mentioned before, we got Hibernate, and I can ask, hey, Hibernate, or maybe I will just type it here. Hey, Hibernate, save this A1 object. Okay, will this work? Of course not. That's an English sentence. So there's something I want to do, but not in English. I'll just comment this here. Now to achieve that, we can simply use some methods. Okay, so Hibernate provides you certain methods to work with. So one of them is save. And in this save, you can pass A1 and your job is done. That's what I'm thinking, but not my compiler. It says, it is giving me some bad words here. It says, cannot resolve save in main. What do you mean by this save? Who is giving you this method? Of course, right, we are working with Java and object-oriented programming where you need, if you are using a method, you need a class, right? Or the interface, or you need something, right? So to do that, we have to use certain things of the Hibernate. So what is that thing? So basically, when you try to connect with database, of course, this is a Java application. So if you want to connect your Java application with database, you need to create a session. You need a connection there. And to do that, I will create the object of a session. And if you observe, this session comes from the org.hibernate, okay? And if you look at the session, it is an interface. Okay, that means we can't simply say session. First of all, I have to write session correctly. Session, new session, because that's the interface. Now, who will give you this session? Example, let's say if you want some object, let's say if you want this particular mouse here, who builds this mouse? Of course, the factory. I mean, yeah, you will say company, but ultimately this is built in the factory. For this session, I need a factory. So that will be session factory. So I will have to take session factory. Again, that comes from the Hibernate. So if you see, it is coming from the Hibernate package, and session factory itself is an interface. Okay, let's see how you get the session factory object in some time. But once you get session factory, I can ask, hey factory, or maybe, we should name it as a factory. Sounds good. So I will say factory dot, hey factory, open a new session for me. And the factory will say, okay, I will do it for you. And this will create a session. Now using this session, I can say, hey session, save this object. And our job is done. Okay, it still says there is an error here. We'll resolve that in some time, but yeah, this is what we got. Now, how do you get the object of a factory? Now that's something we have to get rid of. I mean, this problem we have to get rid of. Now Hibernate says, say if you want to use my tool, you have to provide some configuration. See, we are looking at Hibernate as a genie, right? And when you say, hey Hibernate, do it for us, Hibernate has no idea which database we are using. Is it MySQL, Postgres? I mean, which DBMS you are using. Hibernate has no idea what is your database name, in this case, Telusko. Hibernate has no idea what is a username password. And nowhere we have mentioned those properties, and we are expecting Hibernate to work. So how do you specify those properties? You have to go to resources, and this is where you have to create a configuration file. Okay, but we'll do that in some time. To load that configuration, we have to use configuration class. Okay, so finally we have a class. Configuration class, I will say config equal to new configuration. So once we got the object, I can simply say config dot build session factory. Now this config object or the class here has this method called build session factory. It will give you the session which you can store in the factory object here. And using that object, you can open the session. Okay. Now let's see what errors you get. First of all, you're getting error here itself. Why there's no save? So if I say dot, we have a lot of methods, but save is not there. You can see save is not there. But let me tell you, save was a method which is available in Hibernate 6. In 7, they have removed it. Then you'll be thinking, hey, that's not backward compatible. How can they remove a method? See, it got deprecated in Hibernate 6. Okay, you can still use it in Hibernate 6, but it was deprecated. So recommended was to use persist. And in 7, they have removed save because it is 6 years we are using Hibernate 6, and why someone will use save now? That's what they thought, and it is persist now. Why they went with persist? Now that is a good question. Why not save? Save looks good, right? See, the thing is, if you go to Hibernate website again, and if you click here, which is Hibernate ORM, it says your relational data objectively. Okay, that makes sense because we're converting object into SQL queries. So that's good. They're also saying the latest table is 6.6, development is 7.0, and that's why I'm not touching. I mean, we are using 7, but we should not be using that in production. Okay, so it says you can write complex queries. I mean, you don't have to write complex queries. Hibernate will do it for you. It maintains asset properties and blah, blah, blah. But if you go down, it says Jakarta persistence compatibility. And I mean, this is new. See, what happened is Hibernate is an ORM tool. It says you can simply take the object, you can store it, right? And that's straightforward. But Hibernate is not the only tool in the market. There are multiple tools who claim to be a ORM tool. And the problem is every tool got their own way of doing things. Hibernate says, this is how I will do it. Then on the other hand, we got some other tools, which is TopLink and many more. They said, we have our own way of doing stuff. And it's good. I mean, they have their own way of doing it. But the problem is when you talk about the industry, if one of the project, it's a huge project, is using Hibernate now, in future, if they want to use some other ORM tool, they have to make a lot of changes. So suddenly they they got a lock in the ORM tool, right? So which is vendor locking. So the Java community thought, why do we have different tools working in different ways? Of course, we need different tools, but why they have to be different? They can be different, but there should be some standards which they should follow. And that's where we got something called JPA. Stands for, I mean, now it stands for Jakarta Persistence API. Earlier it was called Java Persistence API, which is JPA in short. Now JPA is a standards. Okay, so it says, this is how your methods should be. This is how it should call. So most of the tools, they thought, okay, let me follow JPA standards, and Hibernate said, we will also do it. And this persist method, is a standard of JPA. Okay, that's why this persist method we got. Okay, otherwise save we were using before. And I think they should mention that somewhere. There's no documentation here in this particular file. It's from JPA. So we are saying save persist. We are not saying save, we are saying persist. And now I will simply run it and let's see what errors you get. So run it and okay, there is no error, but it says caused by class not found main. Because we have changed the package, I think we have not changed our POM file. That's right. And that's why, when you create the project, you should change those things at that point. But if you know the concepts, you can debug it. Still we're getting error where it is mentioned. Is it the runner which is creating a file issue? Still looking at the old one. Okay, now it got the new one. So we have to update that here. It was running the old one, main. And now you got the errors. I was expecting this error. It was not able to find the main class, but yeah, we got this. So it says unable to determine the dialect without the JDBC metadata. So you have to mention these details, and nowhere we have mentioned these details. We have not mentioned the JDBC URL, of course, right? Which DBMS you're working with, what is your database URL, what is the username password. So we have to mention those things somewhere. Now, where do we do it? And that's why we have to go to resource, and this is where you have to create that file. So we'll click on this file here. Now what should be the file name? Okay, in fact, I was expecting it will give me the file name as well. Okay, so I want to show you the file name, which is expecting. So what I will do is, this configuration object is just creating this object here. Okay, this is just the object. It's not loading the configuration. Now to load the configuration, we have to say config.configure. This will load the configuration. And now by doing that, let's run this. Yeah, this is what I was expecting. It says, cannot locate the cfg.xml file, hibernate.cfg.xml. That means it is looking for a file, not able to find it. So let's create that file. And now you know the name. It is hibernate.cfg.xml. And in this file, you have to do those configurations. So first of all, I will get this Hibernate configuration in which you got session factory. Your ID will help you here. So let's set the properties. The first property is Hibernate connection.driver_class. And this is where you have to mention the driver. So we are using Postgres. So it is org.postgres.driver. Next property, it hibernate.connection.url. Remember the earlier error, this was missing. So we'll mention the URL for the Postgres. So jdbc:/Postgres SQL://. Now for MySQL, this Postgres becomes MySQL and //localhost:5432. This is the port number for Postgres. If you're using MySQL, this will become 3306 if I'm not wrong. And / your database name, which is Telusko. Then you mention the username. So I will say property, hibernate.connection.username. And the username is Postgres by default. And I will just reuse the code instead of typing it again. And this becomes password. The password for my Postgres database is 0000, not a good password, but it works. And that's it. So now with this, if you run this code, let's see what happens. I have the file and now it is not crying for the file. It says, okay, I got the file. I can load the configuration, but unable to locate the persister com.telusko.alien. See, the thing is, the class is there. Alien class is there, but still it is not able to find it. And let's solve that issue now. Now to solve that issue, basically what is happening is we have the alien class. And of course, right, we have written all the thing here about alien, the properties, and we have datasetters, toString also. So the alien class is ready. But then we got the error, right? And just to show you the error once again, you can see it says unable to locate the persister com.telusko.alien. It's because your Hibernate configuration has no idea about the alien. So we have to basically mention which class we want Hibernate to handle, because there might be multiple classes in your project. We don't want all the classes to work with Hibernate. So you have to add those classes which you want to add, or which you want Hibernate to take care of. And to do that, before you call configure, what you can do is you can say config dot, and there's a method which is add annotated class, and we'll do that. But then the class alien is not annotated. But let's see what happens. And here we have to mention the class name with the package. So we have to mention the fully qualified class name. So that is com.telusko.alien.class. So you have to mention the class file name, and this should work. Also, before running, I want to show you one more thing. The file name which we have here is hibernate.cfg.xml. Okay, and by default, your configure method will look for it. But what if you have a different name? In that case, you can pass the name of a file here, which is hibernate.cfg.xml. So in case if you are using some different name, make sure that you enter this name, okay, whatever you mention. Okay, so let me just make those changes, and this is not compulsory if you have the common name or the default name. Now if I run this, I hope it will give different error this time. Okay, so it still says unable to locate the persist.com.telusko.alien. See, we are mentioning that here, and I was expecting it to work. But there's one more problem. If you look at alien, in fact, we have mentioned annotated class. So this class, we have to mention that this is eligible for the Hibernate, and we have to use an annotation called entity. Okay, and if you observe, this is coming from jakarta.persistence. So this means this word which you're using, entity, is referring to the JPA. Okay, and by doing those changes, if I run this, or only one change, we got the error, but we got a different error. So yeah, so we are going on the next stage now. So the error says entity, that's good, we have mentioned that entity. Alien has no identifier. Okay, that means it is actually taking alien as an entity, so that's a good thing. But it says we don't have an identifier. See, when you work with Hibernate, and if you want Hibernate to store data, and for the entity, every entity, when you represent an entity, it should have a primary key. That's what it is saying, okay? So it also says that you can do that by using something called @id. Okay, so in this case, I will use @id on the primary key. Not just any variable, we have to make sure that which is the unique key. So AID looks like a candidate for the primary key. Can you make name as a primary key? No, because we can repeat names, we can repeat tag, but not the ID. ID should be unique. And now with those changes, if I run this, you can see something happened. This is the info which is printing here. There's no error, but how do I verify if this worked? Because what we are doing here is we got the session and we are saying persist. Okay, there's no error. How do I verify that? So we can do that by opening our pgadmin. So this is our pgadmin. If I expand this and let's enter the password, and as you can see, my shirt has changed, so that means I'm doing that on some other day. So if you look at the tables, and even if I refresh this, nothing happened. We are saying persist, and it should work, but it's not working, and there's no error. See, the thing is, for Hibernate, or in fact for the database concepts like DBMS or RDBMS to be specific, whenever you perform transactions or whenever you are trying to save things, it is a part of a transaction. So we are opening a session, we are saying persist, but we have to also we have to start the transaction, we have to commit the transaction. That committing is very important. So after the persist, somewhere here, I want to say commit, okay? Whatever changes I'm making here, if I'm saying persist, I want to commit it. Now, commit, you can see we are getting error. It's because commit is a part of a transaction. So here, before you persist, let me open the transaction. So I will say transaction, it's coming from the Hibernate. So if you see transaction is a part of the Hibernate. So transaction, I will say transaction equal to, now transaction itself is an interface. So you can't simply say new transaction, but the session has a method called begin transaction. Now this begin transaction returns you the object of transaction, if you can see in the code there. So begin transaction returns the transaction, and that's what we are getting here, okay? Now at this point on line number 26, we are beginning the transaction. That means whatever you do after that is a part of a transaction, and at the end you want to commit it. So here you have to say transaction.commit. So now you are saying persist, and after that you're saying commit. This is a time when it is going to store the data in the database. Okay, now let's run this. Okay, and we got error. It says relation alien does not exist. Now it's not saying entity does not exist or class does not exist. That's what we were getting before. It says relation is not there. Now what is relation? So in the world of DBMS or database, you call relations as tables or tables as relations. It says the table is not there. Okay, I'm trying to save it, but table is not there. Okay, so that's our job now. So before we make it run, we have to create a table. Okay, and this table need to have these details. but hold on. If you remember in the start of the video, we said that if you have an object, you should be directly able to store that in database. Then why we are creating a table? Of course, you can do that if you want to have a control on your databases, what table name you want, what columns you want, and whatever restriction you want to add. It's your choice. You can create a table by yourself, or maybe you already have a database ready with you and now you're building application. In that case, you will not get this error. But in this case, we don't have a table, and I'm expecting that Hibernate should create a table for me. Now I'm expecting that, but Hibernate has no idea that I'm expecting it. Okay, so I have to tell Hibernate, hey, you know what? I want you to create that table for me. So let's go to the configuration and tell Hibernate. Of course, you have to set a property for that. We can't simply type in English. You have to set a property. Now, what's the property name? It is Hibernate dot. Now, whenever you talk about table creation, table dropping, or altering the tables, it comes under DDL, which is Data Definition Language. So we have to say Hibernate mapping, which is HBM, DDL, HBM to DDL, which is Hibernate mapping to Data Definition Language, dot auto. By default, what should happen? At this point, I want to say create. So by default, it will do none, which is nothing. But when I say create, so we can have none here, or we can have create here. Now, when you say create, it will create a table for you. A good thing, right? So now I'm saying, hey, Hibernate, that's your job. I'm not going to do that. Okay, let's see if Hibernate can do that. Let's run this. And there's no error. As you can see, all these things are info. There's no error. Let's see if that works. I will go to my database and just refresh these tables, and voila, we got our table. That's a good thing. And if you see the table structure, if you look at the columns, we got 3 columns. That's what we have in the code. And if you look at the data as well, you got the data. You got 101 Naveen Java. So yeah, finally we made it work. Okay, so maybe you can take a pause here, relax, and have a cup of coffee or tea or whatever you want to have, and let's enjoy this moment. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed whatever thing you had, and now we can go ahead. But I want to see what query it fires. And also I want to show you one more thing. Remember when we talked about this file name? What if I make a mistake here, which is hibernate1.cfg.xml, and it actually looks for that file which you mentioned here, okay? And you can see it says cannot locate the CFG file, which is hibernate1.cfg. There's no file like that. So if you're going for default, it's good to remove it. It will make your code look clean. Okay, so that works, perfect. But I want to see the query as well. So whatever query you're getting on the, whatever query Hibernate is using to create that table, I want to see that. And to do that, I will go back to the configuration, and you can add some more properties. So I will say property, hibernate.show_SQL. So basically, if you want to see the query, you can say show_SQL, and you can say true. By default, it is false. And that's why you will not see the query in the console. But now I'm saying I want to see the query, what you're firing. And well, let's run this. And that's the query it is firing. If you can see in the console, you have all the queries. But if you observe what it is doing, first, it is dropping the table. It says drop table if exist alien. That means every time you run this table or this code, it will drop the old table. It will create new. Why? It's because we are saying create here. Okay. But what if you don't want to create? In that case, you can say update. Now what update will do is, update will check, do you have a table? If you have a table, it will use that table. Or maybe it will alter the table. But what if the table is not there? In that case, it will create a new table. So it makes sense to use update, not create every time. Otherwise, you will lose your data. So it's good to use update. So create is fun, but use update. But we'll see that how after running this. But let's see what happened with create. So create says drop table if exist. And then it creates a new table, create table alien, and AID, which is the primary key, which you have mentioned here, the A name, which is varchar, and tech, which is varchar. Okay, and then you are inserting the values. Now the sequence goes with the alphabetical order. So A name comes first, then tech, and the primary key comes at the end. And it enters the value, and that's why you got that table. But let's do update and let's see what happens. But for update, let's rerun this. And now you can see we got an error. The error is, first of all, it is not creating a table. Anywhere if you can see it is not dropping the table, it is not creating a table. Why? Because table is already there. It is trying to insert, but while inserting, we got an error. And the error is, it says duplicate key value violates the unique constraint of alien primary key. It's because we are inserting same data 2 times. You already have 101 there. So let's say this time we are saying 102, and let's change the name to Harsh. And let's say Harsh loves spring, and let's rerun this. So as you can see, it is printing the query here. And if you look at the database, let's refresh this table. And in fact, we don't have to refresh. We just want to see the data once again. Or maybe I can just run this query here, which is present. And you can see we got 102, Harsh, and spring. So that's how you insert values here. So till this point, we know how to insert data. So we did the configuration. We created this object. Then I have annotated the class, which is alien. Configuration done. We are calling configure so that it will load that file, hibernate.cfg.xml. And then to save the data using persist method, basically you need the object of session. And for session, you need session factory. And we did that with the help of config.build session factory. Now, if you are concerned about this line here, which is the warning, see, the thing is, when you talk about session, it's a lightweight object, okay? So every time you do some transaction, you open a new session. But session factory is actually a very heavyweight object because it loads a lot of resources, and every time you want to open a session, you can use session factory. So how many times you can use session? Multiple times. You can open session, you can close session, but session factory should be one for the application. And if you forgot to close it, it should be auto-closed, okay? And you can do that with the help of try with resources. Otherwise, if you don't want to do that, you can close it. So let's close the session first, session.close, and then we can close the factory. So factory.close. So it's always a good idea to close your resources, right? And now you can see there's no warning here. So we have talked about how do you store data, okay? Now let's see how do you fetch them, and that's also important, right? So let's see that. So before we try to fetch it, I want to show you one more thing. As you can see, we are doing this in 3 different lines, right? In fact, we can do that in 1 line as well, because see, ultimately you need the config object here, right? And if you can see, we are performing 2 different operations on this config object here. First of all, you can do that in 1 line. And what you can do is, instead of saying new config, we can say new configuration. And then we can say dot, we can put that on new line or entity class, then dot configure. So what we are doing is, if you can see, we are writing these 3 statements, the new configuration, this 2 on the same line here. And here we have to add com.telusko.alien.class. So we can get rid of these 3 lines, okay? And then if you think this doesn't look good, you can use proper structure here. You can give enter, enter, and enter, okay? This also looks good. Okay, so we can get rid of these 3 lines and also this particular statement here. So this will reduce the number of lines of code which you have and less object to manage. So this looks good. But let me just check if this is working. And of course, for that, we have to change the value here. So I will say 103, and let's say Kiran, and Kiran loves Gen AI. That's what everyone is focusing nowadays, depending upon when you're watching this video. And if you look down and you can see it is working, let's also verify from database. In fact, I can just fire that query, and you can see we got the third row as well. So those are the changes we have made. And now let's try to fetch data. Now, when you're fetching data, of course, you don't need this object because data is already there in database. And now I want to fetch. So here we can say I want the alien object, let's say A1 equal to, but this time we are fetching data. So we can't say persist, okay? So what else we can use? So we can say session dot, and there's a method called get. So as you can see, get is deprecated here, but still we can use it. And we'll find another way to fetch data. So let's say get. So in 6, it was working properly. In 7, they have made it deprecated. So that's a good thing, maybe, because they are going more towards JPA, and JPA we use find. But let's use get. And in this get, I'm going to pass the class name first of all. So it will ask for 2 things, the class name and the primary key. Now, which object I want to fetch, or which data I want to fetch? Let's say I want to fetch this 103 here. And to do that, first of all, you have to mention what you're going to return. So I'm going to return alien.class. And we have to also mention the primary key, which is 103. So what it will do is it will fetch this data from, it will call the get method. It will fetch data from database by firing a query, and that will be getting stored in this alien. And somewhere here, maybe I want to print the object as well, what we are fetching from database. Okay, but do we need transactions while fetching? And the answer is no. So transaction needed when you are saving, updating, and deleting. But for fetching, you don't need transactions. I will get rid of those things. And let's see if this works. So let's rerun this. And you can see it worked. We got the output. So it says alien 103, Kiran, and tech is Gen AI. And look at the query it's firing. It says select AID, a name, and tech, and that's from alien. Okay. Now, when I started this course, I was thinking about I will use 6, but then in the flow we have used 7, and now it is deprecated. So we have to find a solution for this. Let's see what else we can use. So I'm just trying to use find because in JPA we do that. Let's see if this works, and it worked. Okay. So now from 7 we'll be using find, get if you're using 6. Before 6 there was one more method which is load. Load, they have removed it completely, is it? No, load is there, it's just that it returns something else. Okay, but load was also there. Then by ID was one of the option, but what by ID takes? With every new version they change certain things. Okay, by ID we have to pass the class. So it's alien.class, but then we have to say load, and you have to pass 103. I'm just trying because there are different ways of fetching data. And now let's do this. Okay, this works. So you can use get, which is deprecated. You can use find, which is a new one. But we can also use by ID of alien, and the ID is 103. But what I'm guessing here is, what if I comment this part? If I comment the printing, will it fire the query? Let's try that. And okay, it's firing the query. There's a concept of lazy loading and eager loading. So I think there's another method for that to show you. Lazy, I will say get reference of 103. Let's do this. So even this will try to fetch data. And let's say if I'm trying to print it here, this is fun, learning on the go, experimenting. I love experimenting. Okay, so it is giving data. So this is also working. You can see it is trying to fetch data. It says by ID. We're specifying which class I'm talking about so that it will target that particular table. And then we are specifying from that table, which is a primary key, okay, with get reference. And I'm trying to print it here. But my point is, if I comment printing, that means I'm not using the object. I'm just fetching the object. And now if you run this, okay, you can see it is not firing a query. Okay, remember this. When we use this code, it is not firing a query. But if I try to use find, in fact, let's use get first because I'm sure get is eager and 103. Now with this, if you observe, I'm trying to fetch data and I'm not printing it here. Okay, I'm not printing it. Still, it should fire a query, and that's what I'm expecting. Yeah, so it is firing a query. Even if you're not using it, it's firing a query. So get basically uses something called a eager fetching, and this get by ID, get reference, uses lazy fetching. Now, which is better? Depends. So if you fetch the data, so let's say if you ask to fetch the data and data is huge, and maybe after fetching data, you're not going to use it, then why you're wasting that call? So that's why lazy fetching makes sense when you are not sure if you're going to use it. But eager fetching makes sense when you know that you're going to use it. Okay, so get is eager fetching. By ID is lazy fetching when you say get reference. Before Hibernate 6, there's a method called load, which does the same thing of lazy fetching. But you can also use this for lazy fetching. So I will just write it here, which is lazy fetching. And this is eager. Okay, but I want to check with a new method, which is find. I'm assuming find is also eager. Let's try that. And yes, it is also eager. Okay, so even if you're not using it, it will fetch data. Okay, and now let's do that. And let's rerun. It should also print the data. And we got the data. Cool. So this is working. So we are able to save data. We are able to fetch data. But what about update and delete? Let's try that. So let's say I want to update a particular object. And for that, I'm just going to uncomment this. And let's say I want to update for Harsh. So Harsh is 102. And the name is 102. And let's say so earlier technology for Harsh was Spring. Now let's say Harsh is moving towards a cloud engineer. Or maybe cloud is a favorite technology. Now, how do we update this? So in that case, of course, we can just remove all this code now. We don't need this fetching. I want to update the data. Now, in that case, we can use session dot. There should be a method called update. There's no method of dot update. But what should be used? So there's something called merge. In fact, in the earlier version, we can also use save to do that. But now we have a method called merge in which you have to pass the object, which is A1. Now what merge will do is it will do two things. If the object is there, it will update. If the object is not there, it will create. Let's see if that works. So let's try to first update and then we'll see can we create new one using merge. And if you run this, it is firing a select query, but it's not updating it. You know what is missing? That's right, the transaction, because we are making some changes, right? So I will say transaction, again, transaction equal to session dot, not get transaction, begin transaction because we have to start it. And after merging, we have to say session dot, no, not session dot, it is transaction dot commit, and this should save it. Let's run, and it worked. If you can see, it says it is firing a query first of all to check if the data is there. If the data is there, hit the update query. And what we're updating, so we are updating the aname tech where AID is this, okay? And now let's verify if it is updated. And yeah, so Harsh, now your favorite technology is cloud. So I'm changing their favorite technology. That's cool. Okay. But I want to try out with different data. Let's say there's 104 and let's have a new name. Let's say Avni, and let's say Avni likes to work with databases. Okay. And now I will fire this. But if you look at the table, we only have 3 records. We don't have 104. So merge makes sense when you want to update. But let's say if you don't have that data, what will happen? And if you scroll, it is firing a query. When you fire the query, we don't have 104. In that case, it will insert. Okay. So this is something you have to remember. Now you'll be saying, hey, we should always use merge, let's not use persist. So the idea is when you want to use merge, the idea is to update something, not create a new record. So use merge when you want to update, otherwise use persist if you're sure you want to create a new record. But what about delete? So I will just comment this part. Now I don't want to create anything. I want to remove. Now, how do we remove? So there should be a method for remove or delete. So I will say session dot delete. Okay, we don't have delete. Do we have remove? Yes, we have remove. And if you look at remove, it asks you for object. Okay, that means you have to pass the object here. And before you pass the object, we don't have the object. So I want to remove this last record, which is 104. In that case, I cannot simply pass 104 here. Can I? Let's try. Let's see what weird it can do for you. Okay, it says unable to locate the parameter integer. So it is asking you for the object of alien. Okay, cool, no problem. I will just fetch the object first. I will say alien A1 is equal to session dot, I will use find of type alien dot class, and the primary key is 104. Now, once you get this object, you can pass it here, A1, and your job is done. How difficult this could be? Let's run this. And yeah, it is firing a select query to find the object and then it is deleting it. Cool. Let's verify from database and let's hit this query once again, and you can see 104 gone. And nowhere till this point we have used SQL queries. It is done by the Hibernate. That's cool, right? So the CRUD operations are done: create, read, update, and delete. Now I want to show you one more thing. So if you look at your database table, the table name is alien. Okay. Now from where you got this table name is because of your class name. So class name is alien. And then from this, it derives the table name, okay? Then look at your column names. We got AID, ANAME, and tech. Again, we got this column name because of this particular properties here. And the type of those column, which like the integer, the varchar here, both of this is because of the type of this particular variables. We got int, string, and string, okay? But what if you want to change the name of the tables and the name of the table and the column? You can do that. So in order to do that, what we can do is first let's work with the column. So here I will say, if you want to change the column name, I can say column, and I can change the name of the column. So I will say name equal to, and let's say I want to say this is A_ID, and then for the name as well, I want to change it, not the tech. Let's only change the name. So we'll say A_name. So these are the column names I want for the table columns. And for the table name also, I want to change it. Now, how do we change the table name? There are multiple ways. One, you can change the class name itself, but again, that doesn't make any sense. Why do we change the class name for database? Then in that case, you can change the entity name. So you can mention the entity name as whatever name you want to have. Let's say alien data. Okay. So in this case, the table name will become alien data. But then there are 3 different levels. We have a class name. Okay. And then from the class name, you get the entity name. So the class name is alien and the entity name is alien data. And from the entity name, you get your table name, okay? And table name also becomes the entity name, which is alien data. So class name is alien, entity name is alien data, and the table name is also alien data. But what if you don't want to change the entity name? You want to keep it constant. You want to change just the table name. In that case, you can use table here and you can mention name is equal to alien data. And maybe in your mind, you have this question. What's the difference between entity and table here? See, for Java, it's all classes. Entity is not important there. It's only classes. But when you talk about Hibernate, what is important is the entity. So let's say if you want to work with HQL, which is Hibernate Query Language, and if you want to represent the name of the entity, then you have to use entity name, not the table name. So table name is alien data, but you have to use entity name, which is same as the class name, which is alien. Okay, so there are two different levels. By changing the entity name, you are changing the entity name. So in HQL as well, you have to use the entity name. Okay, so at this point, we're not talking about HQL, but there's a difference in entity and in the table. Okay, and now with those changes, we can see in the database. But to achieve that, we need to use save or persist because we'll be doing entry as well. So let's say we have the same record here, and this time I will say session.persist. We already have the table, which is alien. Let's see what it does now. So let's run this code, and it is creating a new table. If you can see, it is saying create table alien data. So basically, because of update, it's checked first of all, do we have that table? We don't have that table. So it will say create a new table called alien data with this columns, and you can see column name. So AID, A name, and tech remains same because we are not changing it. And then it is inserting data. The way we can verify is through the table. So I will just refresh this tables here. And you can see we got two tables. Alien we already had before. And we got alien data. And if you see the data here, we got the alien data class. Then we got AID, A name, and tech. So that's how it basically works. So cool. So that's how you can change your table name if you want. You can change your column names. So this covers Hibernate for the CRUD. I hope you enjoyed till this point. Make sure that you like, share, and subscribe. See you in the upcoming videos. Bye-bye.